My life shattered with a single text message from a woman I hadn't spoken to in years. "You have a responsibility to your daughter," it read. The problem was I didn't have a daughter. The words glowed on my phone screen, a surreal accusation from a past I had worked hard to leave behind. It felt like a bad joke, but the cold knot tightening in my stomach told me it was anything but. 3 years had passed since my divorce from Isabella was finalized. Our marriage, which had lasted a brief and tumultuous 5 years, ended with a clean, mutual understanding that we were not meant to be. There were no children, no shared assets beyond a sofa we'd both hated, and I believe we had parted ways for good. I rebuilt my life in a new city, focused on my career as a graphic designer, and had even started tentatively seeing someone new, a kind and grounded woman named Anna. The past was firmly in the past, or so I thought. I had curated a peaceful, predictable existence, and this message was a hand grenade tossed right into the center of it. Isabella's message was a bolt from the blue. According to her, she had a 3-year-old girl named Lily, and I was the father. She claimed the pregnancy was a surprise she discovered shortly after our divorce and had decided to raise the child on her own until now, when financial pressures had become too much. She demanded child support, retroactive from the child's birth, painting a picture of solitary struggle that was clearly designed to tug at heartstrings. My initial reaction was a cold, disbelieving shock. The timeline was impossible. Our divorce was finalized in January. She claimed Lily was born the following November, which would have meant she got pregnant in February, a month after our divorce. We had not been intimate for at least 3 months prior to the finalization, the final death throes of our dead relationship. The last few months of our marriage were spent in separate bedrooms, the air thick with resentment. There was simply no physical way I could be this child's father. I replied with a firm but polite refusal, laying out the irrefutable math. I expected anger, or perhaps an admission that she had miscalculated. Instead, I received a torrent of abuse. She called me a liar, a deadbeat, and threatened to take me to court to force a paternity test and sue for back payment. Her words were sharp and practiced, as if she had used them before. I blocked her number, my heart pounding with a mixture of fury and anxiety. I thought that would be the end of it. It was only the beginning. The next day, my father, Robert, called. My relationship with my dad had always been stable, if a little distant. He was a quiet, hardworking man who had always provided for us, but wasn't overly demonstrative. His voice was uncharacteristically stern, devoid of its usual warmth. "Son, I just got off the phone with Isabella," he said, bypassing any greeting. "She's in a real bind. She has a little girl, your little girl. How could you turn your back on your own flesh and blood?" I was floored. "Dad, it's not possible. The dates don't add up. She's lying. We weren't even together when this child would have been conceived." "Women don't lie about things like this, Michael," he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. It was a phrase I'd heard him use before, always in defense of my mother. "She's struggling. It's your duty to step up. I won't have a grandson of mine acting so irresponsibly." The use of grandson felt like a deliberate jab, a reminder of the familial expectations I was failing to meet. We argued, the conversation ending with him telling me to do the right thing before hanging up. I felt a profound sense of betrayal. Why was my own father taking the side of my ex-wife over me? It made no sense. He had never been particularly close to Isabella during our marriage. He'd always found her a bit too dramatic. Over the next week, the pressure mounted. Isabella began sending emails, her tone shifting from accusatory to pleading, then back to threatening. My father called me daily, his disappointment a palpable weight over the phone line. He started talking about family honor and the shame I was bringing upon them. It was unlike him. He was usually a man of few words, not given to dramatic pronouncements. This was a script written by someone else. The pieces didn't fit. My father's sudden, fervent investment in Isabella's well-being was bizarre. He had never been a meddler. A sickening suspicion began to grow in the pit of my stomach. It was a suspicion that solidified into horrifying certainty one Tuesday evening. I decided to drive to my parents' house to confront my father in person, to make him see reason. I didn't call ahead. I needed to see his face when I explained the timeline to him again, to break through whatever narrative he was being fed. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw his car was gone, but my mother's was there. I let myself in with the key they still kept under the flower pot, the familiar creak of the front door announcing my arrival. I heard my mother's voice from the living room. She was on the phone, her tone a conspiratorial, honeyed whisper I knew all too well. It was the voice she used when she was orchestrating something, a tone that promised solidarity but delivered manipulation. I froze in the hallway, just out of sight, my breath catching in my throat. "Don't you worry, Isabella, dear," she was saying. "He's stubborn, just like his father, but he'll come around. The guilt is already eating at him. Robert is applying the pressure beautifully." There was a pause as she listened. A cold, sharp dread pierced through me, freezing me to the spot. "Oh, I know exactly how to handle him," my mother continued, a smug laugh in her voice. "I've been doing it for decades. Robert still thinks he's paying for Michael's college textbooks. The boy graduated 10 years ago. It's all about framing it as a moral obligation. They crumble under it. You just have to be persistent. We'll get him to pay for your little girl, and then some. It serves him right for cutting me out of his life after the divorce. He needs to learn he can't just discard family." The world tilted on its axis. I leaned against the wall, my legs suddenly weak. My mother, Evelyn, was not just supporting Isabella. She was the architect of this entire scheme. She was coaching her, using the same manipulative playbook she had used on my father for years. All those emergency expenses, the school fees, the medical bills for me that my dad had dutifully paid long after I was independent. It was all a lie. A massive, sustained fraud. And now, she was teaching my ex-wife how to run the same con on me, motivated by a twisted desire for revenge because I had dared to create some healthy boundaries after my divorce, because I had refused to let her dictate my life any longer. I didn't confront her then. The shock was too great, the betrayal too profound. I turned around and walked out of the house as quietly as I had entered, my heart hammering against my ribs. My own mother saw me not as a son, but as a mark, a source of income and a pawn in her game of control and retribution. The drive home was a blur, my mind reeling with the implications. The next few days were a blur of grim resolution. I knew I couldn't let this stand. If she had no qualms about financially and emotionally manipulating my father for a decade, she would have no problem destroying my life. I had to protect myself. This was no longer about a false paternity claim. It was about dismantling a criminal enterprise run by my own parent. I started by meticulously documenting everything. I saved every text and email from Isabella, every voicemail. I began recording all subsequent phone calls with both her and my parents under the advice of a lawyer I immediately hired, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Carter who specialized in family and fraud law. I explained the entire sordid situation to Anna, who was horrified but incredibly supportive, becoming my rock and my voice of reason throughout the ordeal. The most difficult task was talking to my father. I invited him to my apartment, away from my mother's influence. I made coffee, my hands shaking slightly. I played him the recording of my mother's conversation with Isabella. Watching his face was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. The confusion, the dawning horror, and finally, the crushing devastation as a lifetime of deception unraveled before him. He put his head in his hands and wept, deep, ragged sobs of a man realizing his entire marriage had been a carefully constructed lie, that his trust had been a weapon used against him. He confessed that my mother had controlled all their finances. She had always presented him with bills and invoices, appealing to his sense of duty as a father and a husband. He never questioned it. He trusted her. He had been working overtime for years, denying himself simple pleasures, all to fund her secret life of luxury. Designer clothes, spa weekends, and, as we would later discover, significant cash transfers to Isabella even while we were married, likely to ensure her cooperation and silence. We became a team, my father and I, united by our shared victimhood. The dynamic between us shifted fundamentally. He hired a forensic accountant. The findings were staggering. Over the past 12 years, my mother had embezzled over $180,000 from him under the false pretense of expenses related to me. Seeing the spreadsheets, the lines of fraudulent transactions, made the betrayal tangible, a cold, hard number attached to a lifetime of lies. Armed with this mountain of evidence, the recordings, the financial records, the timeline discrepancy, my lawyer filed a motion to have myself declared not the father of Isabella's child and to obtain a permanent injunction against any future claims. My father filed a civil lawsuit against my mother for fraud and misrepresentation, seeking restitution. The legal wheels began to turn. Isabella was served first. Her bravado evaporated the moment she was confronted with the recorded proof of the conspiracy. Her lawsuit against me collapsed before it even reached a judge. The court dismissed her claim with prejudice, formally and legally absolving me of any parental responsibility for her daughter. It was a victory, but it felt hollow, the prelude to a much uglier battle. My mother, however, decided to fight. She was served with my father's lawsuit and responded with fury and denial. She claimed she was the victim, that my father was financially abusive and she was only taking what she was owed for a lifetime of sacrifice. She accused me of brainwashing my father against her out of spite. It was a spectacular, predictable display of narcissistic rage, a performance meant for anyone who would watch. The climax came during a pre-trial deposition. My mother, under oath, tried to maintain her facade, her voice dripping with feigned hurt and indignation. But when the prosecutor presented her with bank statements showing transfers to Isabella's account dated during my marriage, and played a particularly damning recording of her coaching Isabella on how to play on Michael's guilt and his weak sense of family duty, her composure broke. Instead of admitting fault, she turned on Isabella, screeching that it was all that greedy little slut's idea, that she had been manipulated and blackmailed. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to save herself, and it failed miserably. The mask had slipped, revealing the calculating, vindictive person beneath. Faced with incontrovertible evidence that would have guaranteed a loss at trial, her lawyer advised her to settle. My father recovered a significant portion of the stolen funds. As part of the settlement, my mother was forced to sign a legally binding acknowledgement of her actions, a document that stripped her of any remaining dignity and prevented her from ever spinning this particular lie again. There would be no dramatic, public trial, but there was also no escape from the truth, legally enshrined in black and white. In the aftermath, I made the most painful but necessary decision of my life. I sent my mother a final, concise letter, drafted with Ms. Carter's help, outlining in clear, unemotional terms that all contact between us was terminated indefinitely. I blocked her on every platform, changed my phone number, and made it clear to anyone who might act as a go-between that doing so would result in their own exclusion from my life. I knew I could never have a relationship with someone who possessed such a profound capacity for betrayal, who saw her own child as a financial instrument and a vehicle for revenge. The fallout with my extended family was messy and emotionally draining. My mother, of course, played the martyr to the hilt. She told her sisters and cousins I'd stolen from her, that I was cruel and vindictive, and that my father had abused her for years. Some relatives believed her, their minds poisoned by her decades of careful image crafting, and I had to make the difficult choice to cut them out too. But others, after hearing the evidence directly from my father and me, were appalled and offered their support. Their own suspicions about my mother's behavior over the years finally confirmed. My father moved into a small, sunny apartment near me. The experience aged him, etching new lines on his face, but it also freed him. For the first time in his adult life, he was living for himself, his money was his own, and his choices were his own. Our relationship, once distant, deepened into a genuine, supportive bond. We started having dinner together every week, talking about things we never had before, his dreams, his regrets, my hopes for the future. We were building something new from the rubble of the old. As for Isabella, I heard through a strained mutual acquaintance that she had moved to another state with her daughter and the child's actual father, who had apparently re-entered the picture. I felt a pang of sympathy for the little girl, caught in the crossfire of her mother's schemes, but I felt nothing but cold, final indifference toward Isabella herself. She was a chapter one had finally, definitively closed. The paranoia and anxiety took time to fade. For months, I would startle at unexpected noises, my stomach lurching every time my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I installed a comprehensive security system in my apartment and was hypervigilant in public. But with time, and with Anna's unwavering, patient support, the constant state of alertness subsided. The battle was over. I had won, but the victory was bittersweet, paid for with the loss of a mother and a fundamental trust in the world, an innocence I could never get back. One evening, about a year after the final legal papers were signed, I was at my dad's new apartment, helping him assemble a new bookshelf. We were laughing, covered in dust, and struggling with the confusing, pictogram-filled instructions. He paused, looked at me, his eyes clear and calm for the first time in years, and said, "You know, I'm sorry for all of it, for not seeing it, for not protecting you from her. But I'm not sorry for this. For us now." And I realized in that moment, surrounded by the mundane chaos of flat-pack furniture, that while the story that had shattered my life was one of betrayal and greed, the story I was living now was one of resilience, found family, and hard-won peace. I had taken a stand against the toxicity, and in doing so, I had not only saved myself, but had also found a true father in the process. The scar remained, a permanent reminder of the wound, but it no longer throbbed with pain. It was just a part of me now, a testament to what I had survived. The silence in my life was no longer ominous. It was simply, blessedly, peace.